Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. And if you're watching this in the future, hello from July 25th, 2020. My name is Dan Ram, and welcome to the Happiness Festival. With me right now, we have the incredible Professor Barry Schwartz joining us all the way from California. Barry, how are you?
I'm good. How are you? You
I
look way too energetic.
They don't know where I'm coming from and what time of the day or night it is. So
Or
that was
what
a few hours.
substances you have ingested.
Yeah, well, we are actually on opposite sides of the planet. I am in India and you are in Oakland, California.
Yep.
But we're united by our interest and pursuit of this concept of happiness. A very timely conversation because in the midst of this pandemic, it is something that a lot of people have been thinking about, reprioritizing, refocusing, recentering on what makes us happy. Thank you so much for sharing, Barry, on your thoughts on this topic. It was made security, wealth, and happiness. And so for those of you who are joining us, please find the comment section on whatever platform you are, because we'd like to make this interactive. Barry was a professor for many decades at Schwartz College. He is used to taking questions. He's made a career out of it. So we've got some questions already coming in, although this one, I cannot see the full question to it. At some point, it'll pop up, Barry, for you and I to both be able to see. But Barry, just to kick things off, and for those who are participating, can I challenge everyone, please put down your best definition for happiness. How would you define happiness? Barry, while they do that and while they put some comments and thoughts on that, to get the conversation going, how do you define happiness?
How do I define happiness?
Uh-huh.
I define happiness as well-being, which of course is defining one unknown by appealing to a different unknown.
Yeah.
But the thing that I think is interesting for people to ponder is this. Historically, when you look at dictionaries from centuries ago, what happiness meant, its number one definition in many languages was essentially luck.
Mm,
To be happy was to be fortunate.
right.
And you still see that as the principal definition in some languages, and as a secondary definition even in languages like English. And so happiness as good fortune, rather than happiness as something that we earn by doing the right thing with our lives. Certainly in modern societies, it seems weird to equate happiness with luck. But I have suggested in various contexts that maybe it's not so weird, since, and this was part of a point I tried to make in my talk, the world is a more uncertain place than we are willing to acknowledge.
Absolutely.
Even the privileged among us, even the protected among us, are vulnerable to uncertainties. And God knows people who are not in that sort of privileged position are just battered about by uncertainties all the time. So, I think maybe the best we can hope for or pray to whatever God we pray to for is good fortune.
Good fortune.
Good luck, good fortune, good luck,
There was a line in your talk where you said, in the best of times, we underestimate certainty or underappreciate certainty, and we overestimate our sense of control. And that
That's right.
essentially is exactly the situation that we now have landed in with the pandemic.
Well, that's right. So the pandemic happens, and it's like an earthquake.
Yeah.
Here was my life going along just the way I hoped it would, just the way I wanted it to. I've been making all these good decisions, and I have a good job and a good partner, and I live in a good apartment. Aren't I wonderful? And then, bam, the world explodes.
Yes.
You didn't make it happen. It happened to you. A lot of what goes on in life is stuff that happens to us. And the question is, how resilient are we in the face of these uncertain events? And, the point I tried to make in the talk is that when things are going well, when these shocks are rare, we just lose sight of how vulnerable we are and tend to
Yes.
think that we are the masters of our fate. And I think in rich democratic societies, this idea has really been oversold. And the result is that we pay way too little attention to the general structure of the society in which we live, because we think that we're in charge of our lives and we're not dependent on anything. And of
Yes.
course, we're completely dependent on all kinds of things that we have no control over. There's a joke that used to be told about President Bush, George Bush, the son,
Uh-huh.
by a columnist in Texas, which is where he lived. And what she said about him is that he was born on third base and thought he hit a triple. Now, people need to know something about baseball to know what that is, but
Right.
the point is he was born with a gold, platinum, diamond encrusted spoon in his mouth and
Yeah.
thought that everything he got in life he earned. Now, I don't actually know if that was true of President Bush. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. It is sure as hell true of a lot of people who are
Yes.
successful, that they think that no one but them is responsible for their success in life.
Absolutely.
And that makes you really cold-hearted and unsympathetic to people whose lives haven't gone quite so well.
Mm.
So I think one can hope the pandemic will introduce enough humility
Yeah.
that people will be a little bit more, their eyes will be open as they walk past homeless people instead of closed, and their hearts will be more open.
That's a great call to action there, Barry. I
It
appreciate
is,
that.
but is this going to happen? As I said at the beginning of my talk, only idiots make predictions. I don't know what's going to happen.
So we've got a bunch of questions that are coming in. Also, thank you to everyone who put this whole festival together. I know there's Avi in the background. Avi, just so you know, I'm not able to see the full comments in the comment section. I can see the piece that's on the screen. So I'm just going to go with that. So the wonderful Kayun, who is in the UK, is asking this question. Barry, is there anything that is more important than happiness to dedicate collective effort to in society?
I think there are many things more important than happiness. In fact, and here too, I think Aristotle has taught me a lot. Aristotle's view is that it's foolish to pursue happiness directly. Happiness is what happens as a byproduct of living a good life.
Mm.
And so I think what we want is to build a society in which it is possible for all members of the society to live a good life.
Mm.
Now, what does a good life mean? That, it's not easy to answer that in microscopic detail, but it means a life that is full of rich connections to other people. It's a life where you can find purpose and meaning in what you do. It's a life where your efforts to achieve are not frustrated, where it's actually possible to achieve things.
Yes.
So these kinds of things are much more important than smiley faces. And I think that if you create a society where people can achieve those things, smiley faces will follow.
It's a comment that I really appreciate from my dad. I asked him a while ago if he wanted to have a long life, and he's like, no, I want to have a full life. And that's exactly what you mentioned there, just the richness of connections and experiences. But on this, actually, here's another question from Marta. What's your advice for students who are starting university this year? As a professor at Swarthmore, what would you say?
I wish I knew. I think this is, for students who are starting university in most parts of the world, this is really going to be a pretty impoverished experience.
Yeah.
I don't think there are very many universities that are opening up. I don't think that the point of university is to go to parties, get drunk, and dance. But I do think the point of universities includes being able to interact in serious and productive ways with other seekers.
Yeah.
And so losing the social dimensions of university life is a big deal. and particularly for people who are starting, who haven't yet made friendships. You're just an island, and you slam up against the university, knowing nobody, knowing nothing. So I think it's going to be a very pale reflection of what university life can be like. And the only advice I have is not to take this year as an indication of what's possible. Just sort of gut your way through it, get as much out of it as you can, and look forward to next year when we can hope things will be more or less back to normal. Universities will open up and you can begin to cultivate what will be lifelong relationships with other people. I think there was also a piece to that question about whether I think the future is going to be better than the past. And I have no clue.
So, Barry, we actually have a bunch of questions that are coming in right now. So let's try to make it a little bit, doesn't have to be rapid fire. We don't need one word answers, but
okay, sorry. I tend to
2-minute answers. Because I want to honor all these people, and we're not able to do everything there, so it's coming on text. So apologies if I'm looking down. But Chris has this great question. He says, "I loved your paradox of choice talk." So many people, literally tens of millions of people, will know Professor Barry Schwartz from gracing the TED stage multiple times and writing so many books and being a frequent writer for New York Times and many others as well. So he's referencing this. He said, "I loved your paradox of choice talk. Do you think that the world is a happier place now that people are staying at home and overall have fewer choices?" So maybe you can explain a little bit about that choice happiness equation.
So the choice happiness equation is simple. Everyone assumed that since choice is good, more choice is better, and you can never have too much of choice. And what my book tried to argue is that that's not true.
Right.
Some of that was echoed in the talk. You give people too many options and you don't liberate them, you paralyze them. That was what the book was about. So now we're living in a much more restricted environment than we were pre-COVID. And I guess Chris is wondering whether that might enhance our happiness. And my guess is that if we get used to this, it might. Because one of the things we're learning is how unimportant many of the choices are that we have made in the past. Will we get used to it? Mostly what we experience in the short run is the pain of loss. The loss of freedom really hurts. You adapt to that and you discover, my God, I have more time to do the things that I really care about than I did when I was trying to decide what cell phone to get. So it's conceivable that when we come out of this, people will in fact discover that they've learned a better way to live than the way they had been living before. Or we could go right back to being the same people we were 6 months ago.
Absolutely. James Ander kind of continues on this conversation here. He goes, "Happiness to me means that I have peace of mind and I have plenty of resources. How do people in less developed countries find happiness?"
Well, so there's this mythology that, sort of the happy peasant mythology, and that is mythology. If you really are living barely at subsistence, it is hard to be happy.
Correct.
It's not a complete nightmare. Often you have a thick network of relationships with other people that get you through the day and get you through the day reasonably well. But you need resources. And I would say what you need is enough resources to feel secure. Then the question is, how much is enough to feel secure? And the answer to that sort of depends on where you live. In societies that take care of their citizens, you don't need so much. Education, healthcare, it's taken care of. In societies where we're on our own, well, all of a sudden, no matter how much you have, it may not be enough.
Right.
So my view is that the U.S. is an extreme version of you're on your own society. And that leads to a kind of relentless effort to accumulate just because who knows what will happen tomorrow. And if I don't take care of myself, no one else will take care of me. That's not the right way to organize societies, in my opinion. I'm trying to be briefer than I was before.
That's good. That's a great answer. Thank you for sharing that. Sylvia asked a question that I think echoes most people under the age of 30. So we know we have choices. And now the question that Sylvia asks is, how can we reduce dissatisfaction that comes from our choices. Just doing this would improve my happiness.
It would indeed. So I have two suggestions. One, manage expectations.
Yes.
The enemy of satisfaction is having unrealistically high expectations. And
Correct.
I'm afraid that when the set of options explodes, expectations explode with them.
Yes.
And so managing expectations is maybe the single most important thing you can do. Related to that, convince yourself and practice the belief that good enough is almost always good enough. You don't need the best. You don't need the best job. You don't need the best apartment. You don't need the best restaurant. You don't even need the best romantic partner. You need a good enough one.
Yeah.
And if you're looking for good enough, you will find that you are more satisfied with the choices you make than if you think your mission in life is always to find the best. Now, let me emphasize, it isn't easy to do either of those things. It takes practice to moderate your expectations and to learn to seek good enough. But I can't think of more useful things to do than those two things. Good luck.
I love that. We should preach more of this good enough theology. Because I mean, we do live in a social media world where we're so heavily bombarded. And I know we were talking about this before. You've written in the past about discovery versus invention, and even around the concept of happiness. Is it our happiness, or is it a imported influence view of happiness? And the number of people are, people coming out of college going, Dan, I'm going to be this, and this, and only then will I be happy. I'm like, what?
I got to say, I lived with my grandmother when I was growing up. My grandmother lived with us, and she was an immigrant from Eastern Europe to the U.S. And if I had asked her if she was happy, she would have looked at me like I lost my mind.
Right.
Because that was simply never a relevant question.
True.
Her question was, are my children taken care of? Are my grandchildren taken care of? Am I doing the things that I'm supposed to do? Am I happy? What are you, nuts? What kind of question is that? And so I think this really is a new invention that affluent democratic societies have put on us, and it's driving us crazy collectively. Are you doing what you're supposed to be doing in life is the right question. Are you happy is the wrong question.
So Karen's got a challenge for you, all right? So on this concept of good enough, this is what Karen says, really enjoy the talk. I've been thinking about what good enough means for a long time in my own field. How do we build future of systems that are based on good enough?
That's really hard in a free market society where no one is telling anybody what to produce and what to buy. It seems like there's this inevitable ratcheting up of expectations and aspirations. And so what was good enough yesterday is not good enough today, and what's good enough today is sure as hell not going to be good enough tomorrow. In my country, you're not going to legislate that out of existence.
Right.
And so I think here, it's not terribly efficient. You have to make these changes retail. What you have to do is encourage individual people to think about their lives in that way, because society is not going to help.
Right.
Turn them into satisficers rather than maximizers. Just the opposite.
Oh man, so many thoughts. You're just dropping gold here, Barry, and the questions just keep coming. So thank you so much for that. Let's go. I think I've favored a lot of female participants so far. So to not upset the men in the group, let's also move a little bit onto a macro thought. Okay, so Ravi Putnam says, do you think a decade from now we'll be more resilient as a global society?
Well, if we learn the lessons from this that I think we should learn, the answer to that is yes. Okay. Because I think we will focus less on efficiency and more on security. My worry is that this is what we will certainly do in the short term.
Right.
That we will unfortunately quickly forget and go back to business as it was before. So, the question then is, what can each of us do to demand that the social institutions we live with focus on resilience and security rather than on wealth. And I think it's not an unreasonable social and political agenda for each of us to have, to wag a finger at our government leaders when they seem to be forgetting the lessons of this pandemic too soon. So,
Yes.
but Robbie, I can't predict whether the lessons that we should be learning right now will stick.
So, I mean, you're in the U.S. right now, so you are in the heart of what is happening with the Black Lives Matter movement. There's a question on that topic that's coming from Casey Ali, and this is what Casey asks. Do you think, due to societal discrimination based on race, gender, or religion, that it causes different people to have varying experiences and expectations of choices?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And, what I sometimes do when I talk about choice is I start out by saying, listen, I'm going to talk to you today about rich people's problems. And actually, what I probably should be saying is I'm going to be talking to you about rich white people's problems. So the majority of people in the world do not face the problem of being overburdened by options and possibilities. The majority of people in the world have too little, not too much choice.
Yeah.
Even within very rich societies like mine, large minorities of people are faced with too little, not too much. So there's no question at all that discrimination by class, I noticed class was not one of her categories. Class, race, and gender and religion create very different choice worlds for different sectors of society. No question.
Yeah. And if I can for a second talk about your TED Talk 2020, that's possibly not been released yet, but when I look at that list of race, gender, to some extent even religion, but certainly class, these are not choices necessarily. And this is something that you were talking about, the big idea that you were trying to solve with your TED Talk. You said, we hate the idea that really important things in life might happen by luck or by chance, that really important things in our life are not under our control. And good fortune and luck have a much bigger part to play in opportunities. So even when we think about some of those things like class, to some extent religion, these are not necessarily choices that we're making, which family to be born into, what religion, and what is the influence of that religion on our experiences of the world, on our perspective and lens of the world, on ourselves and all of that.
And arguably, that's all the big stuff.
Yes.
Our lives are rearranging deck chairs of the Titanic. The big stuff, the structure of the Titanic is stuff that we inherit.
Correct.
Completely by accident. There's an Orthodox Jewish prayer that men are supposed to say in the morning when they get up every morning. They say a lot of prayers, but one of them thanks God for not having made them a woman. Which,
wow.
In Orthodox Judaism, less true in modern Orthodoxy, but certainly traditionally, the life opportunities of men and women were as different could be.
Right.
And so you thank God for having made you a man and not a woman. That could be a more telling indication of the role of good fortune.
Yeah.
Than saying that prayer of thanks.
What do women pray? What do they thank God for in the morning?
I do not know what they pray for in regard to that particular thing. Presumably, they do not say a prayer of thanks that they were born. Maybe they say a prayer of thanks that they were able to find such a wonderful husband.
Possible. So thankfully, we have a few extra minutes, and there are some brilliant questions coming in. Lindsay's got a pretty long question, but essentially the crux of the question is, can money really buy happiness?
There's a joke about how people who say money can't buy happiness don't know where to shop. And I think the right answer here, based on the research literature, is that richer is happier, but not much happier. And so once you cross from below subsistence to above subsistence, the additional satisfaction that comes from additional wealth is pretty modest. And
Yes.
to the extent that it does promote additional happiness, it probably does by providing the kind of security that enables people to pursue their projects and plans, knowing that they have a safe place to land if things don't work out. So
Yeah.
I think it's much more about being able to do meaningful things in the world, being able to accomplish things, and having a network of people you care about and who care about you. Now, if you're struggling to pay your rent and you're working 2 jobs, it's hard to do those other things. So
Absolutely.
money is certainly not irrelevant.
Yeah.
But we spend too much time chasing money and not enough time chasing the things that matter more.
I remember in college initially coming across this concept, and there was a direct correlation between increasing wealth and happiness. I think up to like the 60 to 80K mark in the US. And then there was still correlation, but diminishing marginal returns. And so you require more wealth to get the same unit of happiness, if that makes sense. And then there's actually a point when the happiness starts dipping as the wealth keeps increasing. And I'm sure with every country and depending on your family situation, those numbers may vary, but there's certainly data to show that at certain points, happiness is very correlated to wealth is very correlated to happiness.
The one thing that's clear is that people who go through life thinking, if only I made 5K more, life would be perfect, are misunderstanding how life works. That much we can say.
Let's do one more question. Richard Venn says, do you believe that children of today are having a harder time making choices than ever before, especially in comparison to their parents?
I absolutely believe that. And I have 5 grandchildren who are between the ages of 5 and 20.
Right.
And they live in wonderful families and have had wonderful opportunities, and they are all struggling. And one of the things they're struggling with is this sense of endless opportunity, which means terror. What am I supposed to do in my life? What am I supposed to be in my life? What should I want to have in my life? There's a massive amount of uncertainty about what life is supposed to be like in societies like mine, where essentially all of the rules, all of the constraints have been shattered, and we are completely free to make whatever life we want. And I think it really is producing massive paralysis in high levels of anxiety, high levels of depression, unparalleled in history, in the midst of all of this affluence, pre-COVID affluence. So yes, I think we are not doing our kids much of a favor by giving them all this, quote, opportunity.
Given that this is the Happiness Festival, we cannot end on that downer. So you are right that that is the situation that is here. Last word from you. Given that this is the context of our lives, what is one insight, one thought, one practical tip as to what one can do with all these innumerable choices that can create that terror of the future? But what can people do practically?
Sure. So again, I'll repeat something I said a few minutes ago. Good enough is almost always good enough. Manage expectations. And the good news is that we have a lot more control over how we interpret what happens to us in the world than we think. So even if there's a lot of luck in our lives, we have a lot of control over how we interpret the good and the bad luck. And that, in turn, has an enormous impact on what kind of an effect it will have on us. And so the thing about the Happiness Festival is that it will give people tools, ideally, to help them interpret the good and the bad things that happen to them in ways that are uplifting or at the very least not devastating. And that's a lot. We have a lot more control over what goes on in here and a lot less control over what goes on out there. So we should get better at using what goes on in here in a way that promotes our well-being.
Fantastic. That is brilliant. And I was going to say, besides his 30-minute Q&A and the 30-minute keynote he just gave, Barry has committed his life to studying this, happiness at work, happiness correlated with choices, happiness at a macro level, happiness at a micro level, in addition to TED Talks that you can watch and lots of stuff you can find on YouTube. He's also got multiple books. I am not his salesperson. I'm just someone that connected and was really enamored by what he's doing. And I think his words are so relevant today to the generations that are the dominant generations entering the workspace. So if you can get a hold of him or his content, please do. But to everyone at the Happiness Festival, thank you so much for creating this important dialogue. And for everyone who's watching, thank you for participating. Share what you're learning with those around you. Let's bring more happiness into the world. Professor Barry Schwartz, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you, audience, for sticking with this. I really appreciate your interest, and the questions were great.
Fantastic. That's us signing out.